Jury.
Here, somebody took my nice, somebody got my nice gin yesterday.
All right, I'll get you on one then.
I wish you could find the nice one I had yesterday.
Jury's present and seated. You may be seated. Bill?
I'll get you one.
She needs another pen?
Yes, sir.
Here you go.
Did he have my nice one yesterday?
Just be careful, that pen kind of is very wet ink, okay?
That leaks.
It's kind of wet ink when, you can use it.
I can get another one if you don't want that.
No, that's fine.
If you're left-handed, you end up with a blue hand like me. All right, just the camera.
Camera and video's on. Witness is
Yeah,
on.
we're good. State called your next witness.
Yes, Judge. State would call Jose Gonzalez.
Okay, Mr. Gonzalez is on the Zoom video, correct?
That is correct, Judge.
All right. Mr. Gonzalez?
Your Honor, if we may, we would like to approach sidebar. We have one administrative issue on this particular witness.
Okay, all right, stand by, please. Stand by.
Yes, sir.
You hear more pens?
All right, did you call the witness? Was the witness sworn?
I don't think he was yet, Judge.
All right, sir, if you'll raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, before we proceed, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence you are about to receive concerning other crimes, wrongs, or acts allegedly committed by the defendant will be considered by you for the limited purpose of proving motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, or the absence of mistake or accident. And you shall consider it only as it relate to those issues. However, the defendant is not on trial for a crime, wrong, or act that is not included in the indictment. You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, sir. How you doing?
All right.
If you can't hear me at any point, just let me know, okay?
Okay.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name?
My name is Jose Gonzalez. Gonzalez.
Where do you reside, sir?
West Palm Beach.
How long have you lived in West Palm Beach for?
About over 10 years.
Did you know Rachel Bay, sir?
Yes, I did.
Judge, the state would move in states, MM at this moment. I think the defense has no objection.
Without objection, it will be admitted as evidence.
State's Exhibit 31.
Mr. Gonzalez, I'm going to show you what's marked in evidence as States 31. Can you see this, sir?
Yes.
Is that a photograph of Rachel Bay?
Yes, it is.
I didn't hear it. That was a yes?
Yes.
How did you know Miss Bay, sir?
She used to stay. She was staying at me at that time.
Before her murder, she stayed with you?
Yes.
So let's bring us back to 2016. She was found on March 7th. Before we get into that, What's your cell phone number, and was it the same cell phone number back in March of 2016? Yours. Yes, sir.
Mine?
Yes, yes.
I'm not sure if it was the same.
Okay, is the number 561-889-6074 sound
Oh,
familiar?
yeah. Yeah, that's mine.
Okay, so if there's records back then that show it's yours, that would have been your cell phone back then?
Yeah.
Okay, and was Miss Bay's cell phone 561-506-3016?
Yes.
Did you know Miss Bay at all to participate in prostitution?
Yes, she was.
Let me bring now your attention to Sunday, March 6th, 2016. Somewhere before 10 p.m. that day, that early evening, late evening hours, was Miss Bay at the house with you?
Yes.
Did she leave the house somewhere before 10 o'clock to go out and do something?
Yeah, she went to go get some stuff.
Okay.
For her.
In reference to Miss Bay, your phone records indicate around 10:07 p.m. and 10:08 p.m. you spoke to her on the phone. Do you recall talking to her for the last time during those minutes?
Yes.
After that 10:08 p.m. Phone call, did you ever talk to Miss Bay again?
No.
Did you ever receive a text back from her again after that phone call?
No.
And you sent her, I guess, a text at 12:37 a.m. according to your phone records? Did she ever respond to your text?
No.
Subsequently, over the next morning until you knew that she was found dead, did you send her a text or try and reach out to her?
Yes.
Did you get any contact with her? Were you able to talk to her or get a response?
No.
May I have just a moment, Judge?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any other questions, but just stand by because Mr. Shea may have a question for you.
Mrs. Shea, any questions?
I do, Your Honor, thank you.
Up here.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Gonzalez.
Good morning.
How long had you been living with Miss Bay? Up to the date that she was found deceased?
I'll say about a couple months.
Okay, hold on. All right. Can you grab the microphone, drag it over here a little bit? She needs to be able to see the witness's face yeah, there you go, thank you. Yeah, just put the microphone closer to you though.
And you were familiar, as you indicated, that she was in the profession of prostitution?
Yes.
And was that her only profession, or did she do other types of work for income?
No, that's the only work she did.
Do you know how she conducted herself? Did she advertise over the internet, or did she have a person that solicited for her, generally known as a pimp?
No, she never had a pimp.
Do you know how she went about promoting herself?
Sometimes she posts on my back page, or she'd just be walking the streets.
Did you have any discussion with her on the evening of March 7th, 2016, as to whether she is going out to solicit sexual favors?
Judge, I'm just going to object. She was found deceased on March 7th in the afternoon, so
Oh, March,
March
the
6th.
evening that you last saw her.
Yes, she discussed that she was going to go meet somebody.
Do you know how she would have made contact to meet somebody? Would that have been through the back page advertisement?
Well, no, I know she, before she left the house, she was talking to somebody on the phone.
On her telephone?
Yeah.
And do you know whose telephone, in other words, did someone call her or did she call someone else?
I don't recall which way it went down, but I know she was on the phone with somebody.
And as a result of that conversation, did she expressly tell you what she was going out to do?
Yeah. She said she was going to have a date real quick and then she'll be back.
Okay. How much did she normally charge for her date?
It's on her. I don't know.
You've
I don't
never
act-
discussed that with her?
No. From the first time I met her, it all depends on the person she's seeing.
And you know that for a fact, that it depends on the person she's seeing?
Yeah.
Is there a range of an amount of money that you have knowledge of that she would charge in her range?
Goes from 20 and up.
Now, did you indicate that you actually spoke with her over the telephone somewhere around 10 p.m. before, after she left?
Yeah, she said she was with somebody. She couldn't talk. That she called me when she was on her way back to the house.
Did she give you any kind of an indication of where she was located when you spoke with her?
No.
Did she have a particular hotel or motel or anything of that nature that she used in her business?
No.
And if you will again, I was jotting down her phone number. Can you give that to us again, please?
Don't know it by heart. It's been a while. It just, I wouldn't be able to. I don't have it in my phone no more.
Okay. And it's your testimony that you had no further contact with her by telephone after that last conversation at approximately 10 p.m.?
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Anything else from the state?
No further questions, Judge.
All right, thank you. May the witness be excused. State?
Yes, sir.
Hold on, Mrs. Shea. Please confer with your co-counsel. They may have questions for you.
Yes, sir.
You have more questions?
I do, Your Honor. And they appear to be substantive.
Up here.
I know this may be a little difficult, but all we're seeking is the truth. During your last encounter or time together with Rachel Bay, were you under the influence any type of a narcotic?
No,
Did you have, or did she have, let me go back, did she have a habit of using,
Judge, I'm going to object as to relevance.
I'll overrule it. Go ahead.
did she have any habit of using illicit drugs like cocaine or things of that nature?
yes,
And do you know whether that evening when she left, had she been under the influence of a narcotic of any kind?
yes,
Can you tell me the type of narcotic?
smoke crack,
Did she also consume alcohol?
no,
Do you know whether she ever had an issue, first of all, do you know where she got her narcotics?
around the neighborhood,
Did she buy them from vendors in the neighborhood?
yeah,
Do you know whether she ever had any kind of an issue or difficulty with any of these people who sold her drugs?
no,
Do you know whether she ever owed anyone money for the purchase of drugs?
yeah,
That's okay, take a moment. I
No,
know these are difficult questions.
yeah, oh,
What was the circumstances of her owing money? Do you have any idea?
I lent her money to get it,
Oh, you loaned her money,
yes,
is that correct?
yes,
Did anyone else provide drugs that she didn't pay for? To your
no,
knowledge?
I think he said no, but
I think you did know. Your answer was no on that?
no, yes.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's no?
Yes is no,
Okay. When you were spoken to the sheriff's office down there the following day when she was found?
yes,
When the officer spoke to you, were you still under the influence of any kind of a narcotic?
was I?
Yes, sir.
Judge, I'm going to object.
No, I was never under any influence.
Thank you, sir.
all right, thank you. Anything else? Any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Can we release the witness, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, is there another witness?
No, sir. Not from there.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect, the Zoom. All right, call your next witness.
Emily Baran.
You solemnly swear affirm that the testimony you shall give this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? I do. Thank you.
Just watch those 2 steps. Have it soon, get comfortable, thank you.
Thank you.
I should have put on the record that the last witness was on Zoom. I don't think I put that on the record. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Baran, just let me know when you're settled with
I will,
your binder and reports.
yes,
Make sure you speak close to the microphone so the viewers can hear what you have to say, okay?
I will, thank you.
All set?
I am, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the court reporter?
Yes, my name is Emily Booth Baran. That's B as in Victor, A-R-A-N.
Ms. Baran, where do you work?
I work at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the Jacksonville Regional Crime Laboratory in the Forensic Biology section.
How long have you been with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
This June will be 26 years.
Can everyone hear her well? Yes, okay, thank you.
You said you're in the forensic biology unit.
That is correct.
What do you do in the forensic biology unit?
I look at items of physical evidence that is submitted in cases that come from local law enforcement agencies, and I'm looking at items of physical evidence for potential bodily fluids and biological specimens that I can test for DNA. And if I'm able to get a DNA profile from these fluids or specimens from crime scenes, I then compare them to subjects or suspects involved in the case to see if I can include them or exclude them as a potential donor of the stains.
Now let me ask you, you said 26 years at FDLE.
Yes.
How long have you been doing the forensic biology as a DNA analyst?
The entire time. I have been with the biology section.
So your entire career at FDLE has been with the biology section.
That is correct.
Did you work anywhere else before FDLE in that field?
I performed a year-long internship with the Orlando Regional Crime Laboratory of FDLE my last year at the University of Central Florida, where I earned my Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Science. So my last year of college was spent working for free, essentially, at the FDLE in Orlando. And during that internship, they were bringing online the short tandem repeat DNA testing that we use today. They were doing an internal validation. So it was an upcoming type of DNA testing, and that is what I did my internship on.
And Ms. Baran, you're in Jacksonville now. How long have you been in the Jacksonville office?
Since early 2014.
And where were you before the Jacksonville office?
When I graduated in May of 1996, I was hired by the Orlando Regional Crime Laboratory of FDLE in June 1996, and I worked there for over 17 years and then transferred back to Jacksonville, which is my hometown.
And I know you briefly touched upon your educational background. Could you flesh that out a little bit, tell the jury about your entire educational background?
Yes, I have a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Central Florida in Forensic Science and a double minor in Chemistry and Molecular Biology. And why I have that minor in Molecular Biology is because there's specialized classes that you have to have in order to work in the Forensic Biology section. Our laboratory is accredited, and in order to get hired, you have to have specific classes to work in that section, and that is in order for our lab to be certified and receive federal funding. We have to follow federal guidelines, and part of that is taking specialized classes, getting continuing education, and taking proficiency tests twice a year.
And you actually beat me to my question. Can you tell the jury what proficiency testing is?
Yes, proficiency tests are tests that are created by a private company, which are like casework samples that we work every day, but they're casework samples that we don't know the answer to. And they're casework samples that are made up by this private company with a case scenario, and they're sent out to DNA analysts, and we work them just like we would a case. We write up a case report and we submit our answers in electronic format to the company, and it has a due date, and a couple months later we find out if we passed or not, and we get a memo issued to us, and it's part of our quality assurance program of being accredited. So it is all part of a system to make sure that our laboratory is following good protocols as well as an evaluation of the analyst's performance.
And have you undergone proficiency testing throughout your 26 years with FDLE?
Yes.
And Ms. Rand, have you testified in court as an expert in the field of DNA identification and analysis before?
Yes.
If you had to estimate, how many times do you think you've done this?
I keep track, it's 119 times.
Does that include here in Volusia County?
That includes here, yes.
And just so the jury knows as well, generally when you were in Orlando, did the Orlando Crime Lab handle submissions from Volusia County agencies?
It did. Jacksonville, we basically service anything in North Florida and any of the agencies in North Florida. And there are different locations for FDLE crime labs. Orlando services a lot of Central Florida agencies as well as Daytona. There's a Tampa crime laboratory, there's a Fort Myers crime laboratory, a Tallahassee one, and a Pensacola. So they're servicing the local agencies closest to them.
So math, not my strong point, but five offices around the state of Florida total.
Yes.
Ma'am, could you describe to the jury what DNA is?
Yes. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the genetic blueprint of life. Basically, it's the set of instructions in each cell that basically creates instructions for a human to develop, survive, and reproduce. You inherit half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father, and your DNA profile is determined at the time of conception and will remain the same until you die. And basically, the reason that we're able to utilize the DNA profile in forensics is your DNA profile is unique to you. Unless you have an identical twin, then there is another person on the planet that has a profile identical to you. But your DNA profile is unique to you.
And Ms. Brand, can you describe where DNA can be found in your experience?
In forensic DNA testing, we find DNA in blood, semen, saliva, skin cells, hair, vaginal fluid. I may be missing something.
I think you hit most of the big ones. Thank you, ma'am. Can you describe for the jury the process that occurs when an item arrives at FDLE for testing in your laboratory in the forensic biology?
Yes, we have an evidence intake section, which kind of resembles going to a bank, and it's like a series of evidence intake people that are like bank tellers, and they receive evidence from local law enforcement agencies, and the evidence has to be in a sealed condition, in a sealed container, so that it's maintaining a chain of custody. And when the evidence comes in, it is assigned a specific, unique FDLE case number, and that becomes a case file. And that evidence is then barcoded and placed into an evidence vault. And when the cases make their way into the specific sections that it's going to be assigned to, because the local submitting agency is asking us for different types of testing. Maybe they want an item tested for firearms or biology or latent prints.
Please interrupt you to ask a follow-up on that specific point. So when you get an item from an agency, they might have specific requests that they're asking you to do related to that item.
Yes, and they ask us to perform certain tests on an item. So it then makes its way around the lab depending upon what specific service requests that they want. And it stays in the vault until it is assigned to an analyst in the specific section, and then it is electronically transferred to them through a system which keeps track of the chain of custody.
Let me ask you this. If an item comes in, it's given its FDLE case number. You said that happens early on, right?
Yes.
And it gets assigned to you as the analyst. would you get basically all the submissions related to that FDLE case number since you're the analyst assigned to that case?
Yes.
Okay. And kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but you did testing related to the trial we're here for today back in '05 and '06, right?
That is correct.
And you did testing up through when?
I was in charge of this case up through 2013. I left in early 2014. So when I left the Orlando Regional Crime Laboratory, my case was then transferred over to another FDLE analyst because I was leaving the region and going to another region.
Now, because the primary testing we're going to talk about today you did in 2005 and 2006, I want to talk about how you would analyze and go through your process back then. Not today in 2021, 2022, but back in '05, '06. So can you explain that for the jury, how you would go through looking at an item and testing it and analyzing it to look for DNA?
Yes. Back in 2005 and 2006, it sounds like a lot, it was a long time ago, but basically we used different kits back then, amplification kits and different instruments. DNA evolves, DNA testing evolves all the time. Companies make better kits, the instruments improve and things of that nature. And back when I worked this case, we were only looking at 13 genetic markers. So a DNA profile, a complete DNA profile, was only 13 areas of the DNA. So that was the kit at the time.
Can you even break down a little bit more? What's an amplification kit and how does it fit into the whole testing procedure?
I'll get there. Yes. An amplification kit is a kit that highlights the 13 areas on the DNA that we're looking at in forensic DNA testing. And these 13 areas of the DNA are highly discriminating from individual to individual. So in forensics, we can look at these areas and it means something because it's going to be different from each person. It's going to be highly discriminating. It's not the part of the DNA that codes for you're going to have 2 arms and 2 legs or a head. It's an area of DNA that is just highly discriminating and it doesn't code for anything, but it's an area of DNA that we can use in forensics. And it's useful because everybody across the country is looking at the same areas of DNA. So in the forensic science community, everybody's on the same page.
And could you take the jury through the process? Say you get, we'll jump to this case, but say you get a sexual assault kit and you have swabs from the vagina, vaginal swabs. How would you test that vaginal swab to see if there's any foreign DNA on that swab?
Well, back in the day, first I would look at the vaginal swabs and look at them conventionally. And by conventionally, I would examine them and determine first, is there any semen there? So I would do a quick chemical color test by taking a cutting from the vaginal swabs and adding a series of chemicals and seeing if it turned a bright purple color, which is an indication that there might be semen there. Then I would take that cutting and put it in some distilled water and agitate the swab and create a slide and look for sperm heads. So then if I saw semen on the swabs, I would know to take that on to DNA testing.
And what's the next step after that in terms of the DNA testing?
After that, if I see semen on swabs from orifices from sexual assault kits, I then want to know how much DNA is there so I know how much to add to the next step, which is like a recipe. And I then quantitate. And in the quantitation method we used to use, it was pretty primitive. We would make a serial dilution of known DNA standards. and we would look at the concentration and make our best guess of how strong that concentration was in the sample. So then we would take that comparison amount and add it to the next step, which is the amplification process. And these kits that I spoke about that have changed over the years, this kit that looked at 13 markers, basically in that recipe, when you add that to your sample, it is going through the polymerase chain reaction, the PCR process, and it's making more and more copies of the DNA, but it's specifically highlighting, like fluorescently tagging, those 13 areas of the DNA that we're interested in, so that when it's run on a DNA instrument and separates out, the detection window on the instrument can see the fluorescent tags as they pass through and collect the data.
And is this process, at least back in 2005 and 2006, working with this kit that had the 13 markers, was that generally accepted within the scientific community?
Yes.
And just so I'm clear, and the jury's clear, back in 2005 and 2006, 06, that's when you started doing work on this case, right?
That is correct.
And you had kits that could test 13 markers, so I don't know if I can fit 13 in here, but. So those kits would allow you to extract and locate data at 13 different markers.
That is correct.
And if you got data at all 13 markers from a DNA swab from a sexual assault kit, let's say, would you call that a complete profile?
Yes.
So you'd have the entire DNA profile at all 13 markers, if that was the case?
That is correct.
Okay. And you said the significant change now is that you have kits that go up to 21 markers.
Correct. In 2011, we had a kit called Identifiler Plus, and it went up to 15 markers. And then in 2017, we had a kit that went up to 21 markers, and that is still the kit we use today.
So the best way to describe the kits getting more advanced would be that they're getting more sensitive? Is that?
They're getting more sensitive and more robust, yes.
Okay. I'd like to draw your attention now to some of the work you did in this case. First, I want to draw your attention to FDLE agency number 051202152 and a report you issued dated March 7th of 2006.
Yes.
Was this report and the work you did in relation to the testing contained in that report, did that involve a victim by the name of Laquetta Gunther?
Yes.
And what did you receive in the submission that was the subject of your testing in that March 7th report?
They were items that are typically found in a sexual assault kit.
And did you use the testing procedures on these items as you have already described for the jury?
I did.
Let's go through just a couple of these items. I want to start with, and let me ask you this, when you get a submission from an agency, so say you get the sexual assault kit, that's usually got multiple items in it, fair to say?
Yes, it's typically an envelope or a box that has swabbings from various orifices from a female. So it's orifices from their mouth, their vagina, their anus, things of that nature, fingernail scrapings.
And those items are packaged separately within the kit?
Yes.
Okay, it's not like they're all jumbled in there together.
No.
And when you get them at FDLE, do you often renumber the submissions? So for instance, do you give it an FDLE number for each item?
Yes.
Let's talk about item Q1. What was item Q1 within that kit that you received related to Laquetta Gunther?
It was a vial of blood.
And why is it important to get a vial of blood or DNA standard from the known victim?
Because, like I said, when we were talking about unknown profiles, we need to know what everybody's profile is when we're looking at DNA profiles, including victims and deceased people. We need to know what everybody's DNA standard is if we're going to look at information. So we need to develop a DNA standard or a reference standard for everybody involved in the case. And when you think about these 13 DNA markers that we're going to talk about, just think of a table of information. So I need a table of information for each of these women so that I can know what their DNA profile is.
And did you have an opportunity to take a look at item Q2 and Q4, the vaginal swabs and anal swabs?
Yes,
And were you able to identify any semen on those swabs?
I was not.
Did you have the opportunity to look at item Q5A and 5B, fingernail strips?
I did.
And what was the result of your testing and analysis in regard to Q5A and 5B?
I got a limited DNA foreign profile that was consistent with originating from a male individual.
And now let's talk about Q3. What was item Q3?
Q3 was oral swabs.
And before we talk about oral swabs, I want to go to kind of take a step back and talk about the collection process and what you'd expect to find as an analyst. Let's start by talking about vaginal swabs.
Yes.
Within your education, your training and experience as a DNA expert, how long is there a generally accepted amount of time that you would expect DNA, foreign DNA, to persist in someone's vaginal cavity?
In my experience, you can readily find semen in a vagina of a living person up to 72 hours, so up to 3 days before it starts to drop off. And that is due to drainage, because if a person's moving around, the vagina drains. It's just naturally fluids, vaginal discharge and such, and gravity. Things are going to start breaking down, and the vagina is acidic, and cells are going to start lysing and such. So up to 72 hours is the norm.
And would you expect generally, say a sample is collected, let's use sexual assault as an example. Say a sexual assault kit is collected and swabs are collected from the victim's vagina. If the assault had been within, say, 6 hours, 12 hours, would you expect maybe to find more foreign DNA than if it happened at 70 or 71 hours?
The sooner that you can collect a kit, the better your evidence will be.
And what about oral swabs? Same question for oral swabs in terms of how long you would expect to see a foreign profile or foreign DNA persist in someone's oral cavity.
Oral swabs are a lot different because in oral swabs, we have our saliva constantly rinsing our mouth. And you eat and you drink and you're drinking water and your saliva in your mouth is constantly rinsing your mouth. And part of that is saliva is rinsing your mouth. It's its job to kill germs, or your mouth is constantly being rinsed. So for semen to persist in the mouth of a living person, it's a lot shorter time period. And the literature says up to 6 hours.
So based upon the literature, you wouldn't expect to find foreign DNA beyond 6 hours on a living person?
Up to 6 hours on a living person, correct.
And of course, how does that change for a non-living person?
On a non-living person, if you're deceased, all biological functions are going to cease too, and you're not going to be eating or drinking because you're expired, and the saliva is not going to be rinsing in your mouth because you're dead.
And did you test the oral swabs in this case relating to Laquetta Gunther, item Q3?
I did.
And using your testing procedures, were you able to identify semen on item Q3?
I was.
And were you able to develop a profile from, or any information, any foreign DNA from item Q3?
Yes. I had to extract the sample twice because I saw semen on these swabs, and I went through the DNA process, and I didn't get anything the first time around, but I know what I saw, so I went back and re-extracted the sample again. And the second time around, I got a complete foreign DNA profile at all 13 markers.
So you're saying a complete foreign DNA profile, so that would have been, you got data at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 13 markers.
That is correct.
And that was a profile that was foreign to the DNA profile in Ms. Gunther.
Correct.
And in your experience over 24 years, right?
26.
26 years at FDLE, was that uncommon?
It's still uncommon for me. The entire time that I've been doing this, I have never gotten a complete DNA profile from oral swabs from a sexual assault kit in my entire career.
And based upon your expertise in the field of DNA analysis and testing and forensic biology, does that lead you to believe anything about the timeline of when it would have been deposited?
It is my belief that this semen was deposited shortly before she expired.
I want to move now to the next victim in the case. I believe this is going to have a different FDLE number. I believe it's going to be 0601011083.
Okay?
And was that related to a victim by the name of Julie Green?
Yes.
And like Ms. Gunther, did you receive multiple items of evidence included in a sexual assault kit to do testing on in that case?
Yes.
I want to draw your attention first to item Q8A. What was that item?
Q8A was a liquid blood sample from Julie Green. And again, this was provided so that I could run DNA testing on it to provide a DNA reference standard for Julie.
And were you also provided in that case, just to run through a few of the things, why don't you read them off? If you could read off the submissions that you received. Let's start with submission on the second page, 001, that starts at Q8, sexual assault evidence.
Yes, there was the liquid blood sample, there was a saliva standard, anal swabs, vaginal swabs, and then there were DNA standards from other men.
Other men.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk to you about the vaginal swabs. Did you locate any semen on the vaginal swabs?
Yes, I examined the vaginal swabs and I did identify semen on those.
And were you able to locate a DNA, a foreign male DNA profile within the semen on the vaginal swabs?
I was able to get a DNA profile that was foreign, but it was not a complete DNA profile. I only got information at 11 of the 13 markers.
And with that type of information, so you have the profile from the first victim at all 13 markers.
Correct.
And you have this profile of 11 markers.
Correct.
Are you able to, in your field, look at those and determine whether or not they are similar or consistent with one another?
Yes, I can look at the table of information from one item to the other and see if they are the same or different.
And in relation to Ms. Gunther and Ms. Green, the first and second victim, did you make that comparison?
Yes, I did.
And were they consistent or not consistent with each other?
They were not consistent. They were different.
And did you locate semen on any other of those items, such as the anal swabs?
I did not.
And you said you received a couple of standards. What is a DNA standard? When your report says that, what does that mean?
It means a reference standard from people involved in the case or suspects involved in the case.
And was one of those standards you received from a Richard Marcotte?
Yes,
And did you get a profile from that standard?
I did.
And were you able to compare that to the vaginal swabs, or the profile you got from the vaginal swabs?
I did compare it, but it did not match.
And one other thing I want to talk to you about that you reference in this report is that you put the information for Mr. Marcotte, so the profile you got, into CODIS. What is CODIS?
CODIS stands for Combined DNA Index System. It is a database of forensic DNA profiles that the FBI maintains, and it's forensic DNA profiles that are put in by DNA analysts like myself from all over the country, from laboratories that are accredited. And the reason we're putting forensic unknown profiles in is we're sharing information to see if we can link crimes across state lines so that we know if somebody is moving around the country or if we can solve any other crimes or something else is going on. But there's also convicted offender profiles in this database as well. So when someone goes into jail, their DNA profile gets put into CODIS, or when they're getting out of jail now, their profile gets put into CODIS. So there's a convicted offender index in CODIS to help us out as well. So if we put in an unknown profile, it may hit to someone that is a convicted offender.
Yes. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So you said it's possible for CODIS to match up cases, unsolved cases potentially.
Yes, they can link cases to cases.
Okay, so let's say you have a burglary where they collect blood at the crime scene and they get a DNA profile, and that profile goes into CODIS. And there's another case, a sexual assault, where they get a DNA profile, and that profile goes into CODIS. If it's the same profile, CODIS will let law enforcement know, more or less, that there's a match.
Yeah, we routinely, weekly have solved cases in our laboratory, and a lot of times we have case-to-case hits within our own section or to other FDLEs within our own state. So it's not unusual.
And with CODIS, are there certain standards that it has? So you have to have enough information about that unknown DNA profile in order for CODIS to accept it?
Yes, you cannot put junky results, for lack of a better word, into CODIS. You have to put in good, complete results.
Now, going back to the complete DNA profile you got from Ms. Gunther, was that result, that DNA profile, good enough to put into CODIS?
Yes,
And did you put it into CODIS?
I did.
Before we move on from Ms. Green, I want to draw your attention to another report you issued in that case on September 28th of 2008.
Okay.
Do you have that report in front of you, ma'am?
I do.
And there's testing done on item 10C.
Yes.
What was item 10C?
swab from left foot.
And what was the result of your testing on that item?
Nothing foreign to Julie Green was obtained. However, there was an indication of the possible presence of a mixture at the amylogenin locus.
You're gonna have to explain what that means to the jury.
There was low-level data at the sexing marker, which means there was a blip that indicated there might be something else there, so there could be additional information there, but overall, there was nothing foreign to her.
And with that small blip of additional information, was there anything you could do forensically to enhance that or try to develop it any further?
Not at that time, no.
And did FDLE back then or even now have the capabilities to test things such as grease or oil if it was on a swab?
No.
I want to turn now to the third victim, is Iwana Patton, case number 0602 02000, and a report you issued on May 18th of 2006.
Okay,
And you had that in front of you, ma'am?
I do.
And did you receive multiple items in submission 001 related to Ms. Patton?
I did.
Did that include oral swabs from Ms. Patton?
It did.
And are oral swabs from a victim another way to get that, the victim's profile for purposes of your testing?
Yes. You mean like a reference
As a
standard?
reference standard, like with the blood, the vials of blood you had before.
Yes. Back in 2005, 2006, vials of blood were still coming in. Today, it's more common to get oral swabs or buccal swabs, or they sometimes call them as a reference standards, because no one really likes to get blood drawn, but liquid blood still comes in, but oral swabs are another way to get a DNA standard.
And from Ms. Patton's oral swabs, were you able to get a complete DNA profile?
Well, first of all, semen was not identified on the oral swabs. That was the first thing to find out, because you don't want a mixture. You want to make sure that there's no semen on the oral swabs, because you don't want a compromised sample. So there was no semen on her oral swabs. And no DNA profile foreign to her was obtained from that exhibit.
And jumping down to the vial of blood on item Q29, is that where you got your complete profile for the victim, for Ms. Patton?
Yes.
And what about the rectal swabs for Ms. Patton? Item Q3, it looks like C. Did you look at those items?
I did, and on her rectal swabs, I did not find semen.
And what about item Q4? What was that item?
It was swabs of sample of substance from victim's left forearm. And the swabs had a dark gray, black tinted, possible dirt look to them. I'm not sure what it was.
And did you analyze those swabs?
I did.
And what was the result of your analysis?
The semen was not identified.
And finally, let's talk about item Q3A. Were those vaginal swabs from Ms. Patton?
Yes.
And were you able to identify semen on the vaginal swabs from Iwana Patton?
I was. There was semen there.
And did this lead you on to the next step of doing your DNA analysis?
It did.
And what was the result of your DNA analysis and testing on those vaginal swabs?
I got a minor male foreign profile that was obtained at 8 markers of 13. And this minor foreign profile was consistent with the oral swabs from Laquetta Gunther.
And I'm going to ask you a follow-up on that question, but can you describe to the jury or explain to them what you mean by a minor profile?
It means that it was a mixture of Iwana Patton, her vaginal epithelial cells were combined with a sperm fraction, which was the minor profile in this mixture. They didn't cleanly separate out, but it was a mixture, and the minor profile at 8 of the 13 markers was consistent with the profile from the oral swabs.
And is the existence of a mixture, is that one reason it's important to have the victim's DNA profile, so you know what belongs to the victim in that mix?
Absolutely. Like I said initially, we have tables of information, and you need a table of information for your reference standards of people involved in the case, the victims, the deceased, and the suspects or elimination standards of people in the case. You need to know what their DNA profile is so that you can account for them in a mixture, especially an intimate sample.
And I'm not going to ask you to look at which markers you had and which you didn't, but essentially, wherever you had data from or information in the vaginal swabs, that data was the same in those spots as the oral swab. So if you had it at 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 12, and 13, that information was the same on the oral swabs.
That is correct. The information was identical. It was the same. That's what I mean by consistent. And if I say inconsistent, I mean not the same.
And over the years up until 2014 you left, right? 2013.
I left at the beginning of 2014.
Okay.
Yep.
So up through the end of 2013, did you continue to do testing for Daytona Beach Police Department and the task force working on these homicides?
Yes, I routinely got DNA standards in that they asked me to run to compare to this unknown profile. And I ran, over the years until I left, hundreds of DNA reference standards, over hundreds of submissions.
And did one of them include a gentleman by the name of Mansfield?
Yes.
And was he excluded on 6/27 of 06, or a report dated 6/27 of 06?
Let me see. It was on the report June 27th, 2006. He was excluded, yes.
And by excluded, does that mean he wasn't a match to the DNA profile?
That is correct. He did not match this unknown profile.
From 2006 through 2013, when you were receiving these hundreds of submissions, did you ever, in all those years of testing in comparison to submissions from Daytona Beach, was there ever a match to the 13 markers or the 8 marker profile you got?
No.
Looking for a point to drop off for lunch. I don't know if we...
I'm just about done, Judge. I was actually just going to check with Mr. Lewis.
Okay.
Just going back to Ms. Patton's testing. The swab of the sample substance from the victim's left forearm. You said semen was not identified on that exhibit, correct?
That is correct.
And there was no foreign DNA that you detected on that exhibit?
It was not taken on any further since I didn't find semen.
So once you didn't see semen, that was the end of your analysis?
That is correct.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll tend to you to the defense probably after lunch.
Okay.
Mr. Shea, are you gonna have a lengthy cross-examination, or?
I believe it will be fairly lengthy, Your Honor,
Okay.
covering a lot of issues.
We'll probably take a lunch break at this time. So we'll reconvene at, let's say 1:15.
Okay.
1:15.
Sorry, get the witness. Ron, get the witness. Yeah.
The jury's out, we'll be in recess till 1:15. Your Honor, address one issues.
With regard to transporting the lieutenant for his brain scan, I think this is to do it on Thursday, or the 25th. That's not possible the week of February 25th.
Puts us way outside the window of trial.
I do the best I can, Your Honor. Got my assistant working hours in the office. I'm concerned about February 24th and 25th. The jury's going to go out for closing arguments and deliberation shortly.
I think that's, I mean, the jury should be out in the worst case scenario on Monday or on Tuesday, Judge. So that's the 21st, 22nd. If they're still out on the 24th and 25th, that'd be a very extraordinary circumstance. I mean, I think realistically, I guess we can stick to our schedule. If he goes out the 24th, maybe we
We
can
get
start.
the earliest date we can get.
Yes, sir. And if the
And then
jury's,
we'll stop the trial for a day.
okay, I'll tell you to try to get the 24th, 25th, whatever's earliest.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.